This is the eLearn podcast. If you're passionate about the future of learning, you're in the right place. The expert guests on this show provide insights into the latest strategies, practices, and technologies for creating killer online learning outcomes. My name's Ladek, and I'm your host from OpenLMS. The eLearn podcast is sponsored by eLearn Magazine, your go-to resource for all things online learning. Click-by-click how-to articles, the latest in edtech, spotlight on successful outcomes and trends in the marketplace. Subscribe today and never miss a post at elearnmagazine.com. And OpenLMS, a company leveraging open source software to deliver effective, customized, and engaging learning experiences for schools, universities, companies, and governments around the world since 2005. Learn more at openlms.net. Hello, everyone. My name's Ladek, and my guest for today is Sarah Mercier. She's the CEO at Learning Ninjas, where she specializes in innovative learning technology and strategic implementation of learning solutions. In this analytic conversation, Sarah and I talk about what xAPI is exactly, and what are all the moving parts involved to make it work. We then talk about what are the biggest barriers for implementing xAPI within an organization or an institution. Then we move on to have Sarah explaining how xAPI helps to create a data strategy and what specific process she follows with her team in order to implement it. Next, we talk about what are Sarah's recommendations for how to implement xAPI so that you can see tangible results that everyone can use effectively and immediately. And then finally, we tie together our conversation like we normally do by asking Sarah what her vision is for the short-term future of xAPI and its continued proliferation in learning analytics. Now, remember, we record this podcast live so that we can interact with you, our listeners, in real time. So if you'd like to join the fun every week on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on YouTube, just come over to elearnmagazine.com and subscribe. Now, I give you Sarah Mercier. Hello, everyone. My name's Ladek, and as you heard, we're here at the eLearn podcast. Thank you for joining us today. If you are listening live or if you're listening to the recording later on, it doesn't really matter. As I said earlier, I'm coming to you from OpenLMS, which is a company that's in the online learning space there. But today, we're not talking about us. We're talking about my guest and what she does, Sarah Mercier, who is, I think, are you the head ninja? You're the CEO. I know you're the founder.
I am the head ninja. Although we don't actually talk about it like that because everyone on the team is so experienced and experts in what they do. So, but if anybody's responsible for anything going wrong, I guess that would be me. I take all the liability. So I guess that makes me a head ninja.
Heck yeah. Which, I'm sure we need to find out what that is. There's probably a very particular term that the ninjas use. And it was probably whispered, in some strange language that we will never know, some secret language.
Yeah.
But Sarah, you Learning Ninjas, and we're going to be talking about xAPI. But before we talk about xAPI, tell us about yourself. How did you get to Learning Ninja? How did you get to this place? Has xAPI in your whole learning journey? Is that where you started and you just found it? Or give us the 60 seconds on you.
That's a great question. Kind of a loaded question because I'm trying to dig, not loaded, but I'm trying to dig back through my memory to see where this started. So I came to Learning Ninjas back in 2017 or 18, I guess it's 2017. And I merged my previous company, Me Learning Solutions, with Learning Ninjas. And so I was working with Sean Putman and Brian Dusablon, and we were building this company together. Learning Ninjas has always been a collective of experts and contract folks that work in specific areas that are very highly specialized. And so we come together on projects. Now it's just turned into, a large organization that works with companies all over the globe, and we work with for-profits, nonprofits. But to answer your question about xAPI and where it started, back many, many moons ago, in 2013, I guess, when xAPI went back when it was Tin Can and it was becoming a thing, my colleagues, so Brian and Sean, were very heavily involved in a lot of the work early on. Actually, Sean Putman on our team wrote a book on xAPI with Janet Efron. Yeah, so they have a fantastic book on xAPI and data, actually specifically around data strategy. And so back during that time, everybody was trying to figure out what we could do with this. How could we standardize it? And so back early on, Sean and Brian put together a site called Learn xAPI. And that site only contained a project where you could go in and learn how to program xAPI and have it send statements to a learning record store. And so it was like the first thing about how to learn xAPI way early on. And that was back whenever there were, a lot of these xAPI camps going on at conferences, and people were trying to figure out what to do and special use cases. And, at some point, Megan Torrance's team put together the xAPI cohort. So all of us were just working on stuff. Now, early on, I started working with Sean on a project where we wanted to capture xAPI data, or we wanted to capture data. I didn't care how. We wanted to capture data around how people in public health were answering an assessment and what paths they were taking. And we were actually using the data to help us justify what areas and what competency areas we wanted to seek additional funding to build additional training opportunities. Okay. So that's how we were using those data. And that was, oh my goodness, I think that project was in 2014. So that's about how long I've been working with xAPI, although I was around in 2013 when all this stuff was going on. So I've been around it since the beginning, working on projects super early. My first project, we were using JavaScript to program it into a very ridiculous assessment tool that was built in Adobe Captivate, which I do not recommend ever taking that approach. There were a number of reasons why we landed on that, but we got some really good data, and it was a lot of work, and it was very manual. So since then, we've done everything. I say we, mostly me, but also working with the team. My team has done interactive ebooks. We actually won some awards for that, how to program xAPI statements to be sent as you're interacting with an ebook. We've done projects. I've got a mobile application I work on with a few other organizations for the Department of Defense. So all branches of the military and their families, capturing data about what people are interacting with in that mobile application. And I have multiple clients that are anywhere from they have no LMS to they have an LMS that's SCORM only to they have an LXP, a learning experience platform that allows them to do xAPI, and maybe they have an internal LRS with that or an external LRS. So I've got all different types of use cases at this point that we've worked with. And so it's a lot of fun to see how that has evolved over the years and all of the hard work that folks have put into that. I mean, I remember working with Aaron Silvers really early on and Megan Bowe on some stuff. Like it's really evolved over the years. The rest of C folks, I mean, there's just so many people that have worked on this spec and so many really cool projects that have come out of it.
Hi there. I'm sorry to break into the show right now, but if you're enjoying this show, if you are challenged, if you're inspired, if you're learning something, if you think that you're going to be able to get something out of this to put into your practice, do me a quick favor. Pause right now and just hit subscribe on your podcast player right now. It doesn't matter which one, just hit subscribe, because that way it'll make sure that you never miss an episode in the future. Thanks. Now back to the show.
That is awesome. I love that we are, well, I'm not going to call you a founder, but we're talking to somebody.
No, don't call me a founder. I've just been I've been involved. Like I've been sold on it since the beginning.
You're not apologies for that, but you're fangirl. You know what I mean? You found it and you fell in love with it.
Yes.
And now you've been passionate about it for, it's 10 years now, right? So,
oh my gosh, I'm so old.
Yes. Okay, well, I've got more gray hair, believe me. It is, we've had xAPI specialists on the show before. We've done this at the eLearn Success Summit. We've talked about, we've had, there's just so much cool stuff that you can do with it out there.
Yeah.
What's the single big, but it's just not, it's still, you're going to conferences and people are coming up and saying, X what? That still happens. What's the biggest barrier to making this either mainstream or the default, or just getting it into the common, palette of what instructors and designers are using?
I think that's a great question. Honestly, I think it's because people focus too much on the technology and are not about what the questions they're trying to answer. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I really love is recently, and there's so many reasons for all of this, but recently I've really started to see more of a shift to people talking about data strategy and talking about what questions they're trying to answer. So when I work with my clients, one of the things that we always do is we say, if you could learn anything about what people are doing with your training content that you don't know now, what would it be? Like, what would be helpful to you? We start with business outcomes. What is your business trying to do right now? Are you trying to sell more stuff? Are you trying to, get more reach? Are you trying to find out like who's using your content and who's not? Like, what questions are you trying to answer? And that is a challenging question to ask people in the learning and development space. And I think that's because we've not done a good job of measuring things ever as a whole, like as a practice. And I think everyone would agree on this, is that we've always measured butts and seats. We measure attendance. We see how many people have looked at this, how many people have showed up, and then we make a bunch of multiple choice quizzes and see, did people pass or fail a thing, right? And so that doesn't really tell us, do people actually do this now? Like, did they actually learn something that they're applying in practice? And so we can go down a whole rabbit hole on this about why these things happen and why it's hard to measure and different levels of capacity in organizations. But what I really, really like is starting to think about, if you could measure anything, what would it be? And starting with a data strategy. And that's what we start with our clients always first. Like, what is it that you want to know that you don't know now? And what would be helpful for you to know about this training solution that you want to put in place? And if you know what those questions are, you can start to find out ways to collect data around that will help you answer it. And data by itself doesn't answer it, but it can give you a lot of information that you can pair with other, whether it's anecdotal data or other follow-ups and surveys and things like that, that gives you a better picture of what's actually going on. So I think that just focusing on what you're trying to do instead of the technology first helps you figure out what xAPI is. Because if I said, okay, if you want to know the answer to this question, then we have a way to collect that data. I also sometimes will explain this to people as like, this is the Google Analytics of training stuff, right? This is us trying to figure out, how are people doing stuff in the background, things that you don't know about right now. So there are a lot of ways to kind of go at this. But if you go to a conference and you're like, come learn about xAPI and let me show you active verb object and let me show you about profiles and let me show you about data standards and all that stuff, people are going to be like, I don't know what in the world you're talking about right now. And if I start to teach you how to build an xAPI statement and you don't know what you want, then none of that makes any sense. So really starting to think about it in context of what you're doing. And that's hard because it's different for different organizations and different businesses and whatever it is that they're trying to achieve in their organization. There are some things that are similar, like, if you're looking at compliance or if you're looking at sales or whatever, like there are industries and there are people that are doing the same types of work. So you can start to learn a lot through case studies, but it's just challenging when you focus on the tech first.
So before we kind of go down the xAPI path, then for most people who are, let's just, the spectrum of people, whether you're in a corporate situation or higher ed or whatever, do you find yourself often saying, look, you probably already have an 80% solution out already, where you could find the data that you want, or, we don't really need something new here. It's, if we actually ask that question about what data do you want, like you're probably sitting on it. You just haven't used it or recognized it yet. Do you find that a lot, or is it almost always, we need to build something?
That's a really good question. So I actually have one organization that we work with. They are in the benefits. They provide benefits to organizations, and they have no learning platform. They host everything on their website. They use Google Analytics to track everything in the background, and they're like, what can I get that I'm not already getting using Google Analytics? And so we are looking at each of their courses one by one to see, like, here's what you could get out of this that you don't get out of Google Analytics, right? A good example is tax time, and they're wanting to release some information around certain tax breaks that their customers get. And they have to learn how to file this stuff, right? And so it's really interesting to us to know which of those pages or what of the information in there are people hitting most often, what's most popular, what do people have the most questions about, how are they interacting with some of the scenarios. It kind of gives us insight from a training perspective into some things that you're not going to see with Google Analytics, certainly not as easily, but you're not going to see at that high level web level, right?
Mhm.
But what we're learning is that you can pair those data together and it gives you a much more comprehensive picture of what you're dealing with. So yes, sometimes people are sitting on a lot of data, and then there are these little gaps. There are these little gaps that you can say, oh, but we could pair it with this information. If you could just dig into this one little thing that's going on in here, that'll answer a question for you, right? So it's kind of pulling all that together. Again, that's why the data strategy is important, because we go through and here are all the questions you want to answer. And we actually have a column for here's where that stuff already exists right now that you don't have to do anything to get. Or maybe you're validating something, right, that you're already getting somewhere else.
So I love the example you just put up there, because so many of our listeners right now they're expecting that, okay, I've got to start with an LMS because that's going to be the base technology, etc. So I guess let's ask the most basic question, like, what do I need to get started using xAPI? Be it in combination with whatever technology I already have. Is there a sign up, put my credit card in, subscribes kind of solution where they're going to build, like, I know you got to build a record store and all that kind of stuff. Like, does that exist now, or am I still cobbling things together? Like,
It does exist.
What's the base to actually get going on this?
Oh my goodness. So there's so many paths. So the second piece after data strategy, or along with data strategy, that we look at with xAPI is your learning ecosystem. So we figure out what are the pieces of your current learning ecosystem and where do you have gaps. For most people, you probably already have everything you need to get started with xAPI already, except for maybe a learning record store. So unless you have a learning platform that has a built-in LRS, right? So you can evaluate that in your own organization.
You got to say that's probably pretty rare, right?
To have an LRS?
Yeah.
Less so in more recent years, depending on if you're working with like one of the behemoth old LMSs that now call themselves an LXP, or whether you have a newer platform that is really truly a learning experience platform. A lot of the newer LXPs do have LRSs inbuilt. Oh, okay. Now, some of them are not conformant, meaning that they don't do everything and give you certain access to things. So one of the things, so actually one of our other clients, they have an LXP, so they're working with LearnUpon, and that LXP has a built-in LRS, but it's not as robust as, say, Veracity, right, which is its own learning record store. So we actually use both. They load their xAPI-enabled content into it. It gives them some data and analytics internally, but at the same time, we're also sending data to Veracity so that we can work with more comprehensive, in-depth analytics and visualizations, right? So you can send data to multiple record stores at the same time. But we also have clients that, so another client that we have on Workday, LMS, SCORM only, right? But we're publishing their stuff to SCORM, but we are doing what's called, this is a Torrance learning term, but we're sidecarring their LRS data on the side. So basically, we publish it for SCORM, but we've programmed in xAPI statements using JavaScript to go send to the LRS on the side. So the example that we have right now, it's something that they built in Articulate Rise. There are some storyline block interactions that are built into that, where we have them doing some pretty advanced scenarios, and we're sending the data that we wanted to collect out of those scenarios to Veracity, but they're just publishing it for SCORM. So you could have no learning platform, you could have a SCORM only platform, you could have a super comprehensive platform. Really, if you are creating any digital content, most likely you will be able to use xAPI. There are sometimes people run into issues with JavaScript getting blocked in their organization depending on firewalls. So this is all stuff you have to test, right? A lot of folks will do on-premise learning record stores so that stuff doesn't get blocked. But I say all this to say, if you're listening right now and you're like, you just said a bunch of stuff that means absolutely nothing to me and I totally don't understand, I get it. Just know that no matter what level you're at in your organization, you can probably do xAPI if you just have an LRS. Now, to answer your question about can I just plug in my credit card or whatever, the good news is that a lot of learning record stores, you can actually set up an LRS for no money, because LRSs are generally, they make their money off of storage. So until you hit a certain number of statements storage, right? Statements in the storage for that LRS, you're not going to get charged.
Right.
So what I do with all of my clients is that as we're testing and we're helping them build up their ability to do this, they're not paying for an LRS yet, right? We're picking an LRS that best meets their requirements. And we know that once they get to a certain level and they're like, yes, this is working, we're great, we're ready for production, then they can start paying for it because they're going to hit that number of statements at some point. So it's a really nice onboarding process without a financial commitment up front, right?
Yeah,
At least
I
as
love
far as
that.
the software.
You've really flipped the model on its head, right? Which I think matches well with sort of the expectations around all SaaS services today, where it's like, look, like have the freemium, have the free trial, make sure it fits, and then find yourself in a package, right? Or like a lot of them are, it's like, hey, look, here's a 30-day trial, like kick the tires as much as you want, and then we'll just start billing your credit card if you stick around for longer. I really like that a lot. So
well, and let me say one other thing before you switch gears about that is the other thing that's really nice about this is, let's say that you are trying out an LRS, like for example, the Storm Cloud, right? Storm Cloud has an LMS. They also have their own inbuilt LRS. Or Watershed or whatever. Like, let's say you're using an LRS and you're getting there and you're like, oh, this is great. It's getting what I need. Or maybe it's too expensive, or maybe it's, it's not giving you the visualizations you want or whatever. You can quickly switch to an LRS just by changing the endpoint and credentials from the content that you're sending. So to switch data, your LRS from one to another, it's like a matter of minutes. It's not like an LMS switch or a learning platform switch where you have to migrate all this stuff over. It's almost instantaneous, at least to make the switch. Now, if you're pulling your data over, you have to export and then import back in. But I mean, these are truly interoperable, these learning record stores, as long as they're conformant. You've got really, really easy switches. And we've done that. We've had to do that a couple of times, switch LRSs at the last minute.
But I love that your sort of second part of the answer there only reemphasized where my question was going, because you said things like JavaScript and sidcarring your your LRS and this and that, and then you just said oh, here's the number of statements you have. It's like I heard about half of the listeners' eyes glaze over because they're first of all they don't even know what all those things, and then when you start mentioning programming and this and that, it's like you just put the terror of everything into your typical instructor, even your typical designer, right? Who is thinking more about the learning outcome and the pathway and that kind of thing, rather than how do I actually like get under the hood and change the oil, right? So talk to me about, is this something I'm really going to need to scale up, or am I going to have to come hire Sarah to do this, or what? How does that work?
It depends. So if you're doing something relatively complicated, then maybe you might need some support, right? And support comes in a lot of different forms. So I'll talk about that in a minute. If you work with a tool that allows custom statements already, then it may just be picking it from a pick list in your e-learning development tool. Some e-learning development tools are set up to build custom xAPI statements. For example, Storyline just released it recently, right? But there are a handful of tools that allow you to do it. Like we've been using Adapt for years and building custom xAPI statements, right? So some tools allow you to do it a little bit easier than others. When you are putting together those statements, you're going to have to understand enough about how it works in order to do it correctly, right? So that you can set it up. But a lot of the tools have made it as simple as, I want you to, when the user clicks this button, I want you to send a statement that says, Sarah, click this button, or whatever, right? So it can be relatively easy to do. Now, if you are not using a tool that makes that easy, you can still use JavaScript. And the good news is that a lot of people who work in this space will say, just copy this code and paste it in this box and change this word, right? And so if things like JavaScript and HTML totally freak you out, if you are comfortable using copy and paste, then you can do this, and you can start to play around with it, and you can start to build up some of those capabilities. Now, I would recommend working with somebody who knows what they're doing, or you could get into the xAPI cohort, which is now put on by the Learning Guild twice a year. They do a spring one and a fall one, and you could bring a project and say, I have this project. I do not do code. Who would like to help me on this project? Right? And it's free. But it is, team projects and whatever. So who knows? I have participated in the cohort for many, many years, and I do presentations. And a lot of what I've learned over the years, I've gotten out of participating in the cohort, because there's so many people in there that know what they're doing and can answer questions when you get stuck and are pretty, would like to help you. But that's all pieced together. And I think that makes it challenging for some people, because there's like everything you need to know about learning xAPI exists for free.
Sure.
Now, for you to go out there and try to piece that together might become a nightmare for you, right? Because there's just a lot of different information in different places. So what we did last year is we put together a course that was specific for those people. For people who that code freaks you out, maybe you are an instructional designer and you're literally just trying to figure out, how do I design for this? Because I don't build e-learning, I just design it. Or maybe you're an IT person, or maybe you're a training manager that's trying to make decisions, or a director that's trying to make decisions about whether or not to use xAPI. So we built a course for this that takes you through data strategy and ecosystem and what is a statement. And then by the end, you put together your own LRS and you send your own statements to it from a few different learning solutions, right? So if you are serious about doing this, you can try to piece it together for free by things like xapi.com and the Learning Guild's cohort. And you can follow folks like Jeff Batts, who does a ton of videos that are available on putting stuff together in xAPI. What I think you'll find is that some of the foundational stuff, it's challenging to piece together. So taking a course on it will help walk you through the whole thing. So it just kind of depends on what your preference is, right? How comfortable do you feel with technology, and how do you want to learn it? But all of this I say to say you have to know enough about it to be able to design for it, and understanding how statements are structured and what types of things you need to design and what types of questions you're trying to answer is super helpful. You do not need to go learn how to write JavaScript or how to write HTML, but you will end up learning some things about it in the process.
Sure. So then take me to the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow for someone who says, look, I want to dip my toe. I want to learn about this. I want to start playing around with it. Can you give me one or two examples of like that super sexy outcome or solution that you've done at Learning Ninjas or whatever, where it's like, they didn't even know this was possible, but now here they are with this data set, or with the, with this knowledge about their learning that was totally game changing. Like what's that scenario look like?
Yes, absolutely. So I'll take a few different case examples. So one would be the example that I gave you earlier, the public health example. As folks went through and they filled out their assessment and they self-assessed, like, where are areas of competency, we were able to take those data on the back end and be able to see, here's where some of our trends are. And so whenever we're going to say we need more funding in this area, we know we need more funding in project management, and we need more funding in working with stakeholders. And we were able to use that data to get funding to build those projects, right? So that's an example of data that we collected out of the training itself, because this was just a self-assessment with some training that came with it. And in the background, we were able to collect all those data to see kind of where were different public health departments, where did they land? We wouldn't have known that before, because it would just be a black box of content, right? We wouldn't have known. The second example that I'll give you is one of the organizations we're working with. They're a global organization. They build hearing technology. So they work at they work in hearing aids and headsets. And if I told you what they were, everybody probably has some of their technology in their house. But they are building both internal and external training. So they need to train all of these different professionals that use their products. whether it's people in sales, sometimes it's people that are doctors that are using it for like the hearing aids. So different types of folks externally. And then the internal people are people within their organization that also need to learn these things. So internally, they're using just a regular LMS, SCORM only. They don't have an LRS. Or a learning experience platform. And then externally, they're trying to figure out, and these people, this organization is global. So one of the examples or one of the things that they're working on right now is for each of their sales or product launches, they want to know in what countries are people using our training content and what stuff inside the training are they using. And one question, I'll just give you this is just an easy one that a lot of people ask. One question they said is, well, some of our folks said that we don't need to translate the job aids in this. I think it was in German. We don't need to translate the job aids because the one they don't use the German version. They only use the English version. And I'm like, okay, we'll put a German version and an English version up there and see which ones they download inside the course, right? Now, in order to capture that data, there are other ways that you can get that data, but the easiest way to get it out of an e-learning module is xAPI, right? How many people downloaded this one? How many people downloaded that one? So, it's stuff like that. I mean, things like, what is the path that people took through this particular training, because they can jump around. So did they go straight to the product pricing? Did they go through here, here, here? So we can kind of see in a histogram, like, what are the ways that they're flowing through this, and overlay that. Like, what is the typical path through this content? Is everybody skipping the background of this information? Then we don't need to put that in there in future product launches, because their product launches are basically the same thing each time. Right? It's just updates to the product. So what information are people interested in? What are they not? What are they using? And maybe we need to figure out why they're skipping this stuff. The other example, this is one from Sean. One of his examples is well, actually, I can give you a bazillion of these. Is a project where they were making videos for their e-learning. So it's like, I'm going to show you how to do a process, and then I have a little video for you. Well, what they found out was that nobody was watching the videos. And they were like, oh my gosh, what's wrong? Is it a technology thing or whatever? And what they found was that they interviewed the audience and they said, we don't need the video. Your training is good enough. Like, these steps were all we needed. I didn't need to watch a video too, because the steps were straightforward enough. So they stopped making the videos, because that was hundreds of thousands
I was just they probably saved like 2/3 of their budget just with that one decision. Yeah.
Exactly. So save you a lot of money on stuff that you don't need to be doing anymore, right? If you're translating a bunch of stuff and nobody's looking at the translated version, then why are you spending the money and time to do that, right? Now, you have to find out, why aren't people using this? You have to follow up on that data. It might be the link is broken. You don't know until you ask. But it starts to give you some insight into these things. Another one of our clients, they were tracking videos. They wanted to see, and they were a product company too. They wanted to see, where were people pausing and going back? Where, like, was there a point in the video where they were dropping off? Which was really important to them, because it was trying to walk through their system, and they were using it to improve the system. So, like, where were they seeing that people were getting hung up in as they used this help? And so they were able to make improvements there. It's just like every project's so different. I talked about the one, the tax season one. We're trying to figure out which of the resources do they actually need that's in there? What are they using, and where are they getting hung up when they try to apply, like how they set their stuff up? It's so all over the board. But it really depends on, you have to know your content and know what you're doing. And I'll tell you what, it'll also really quickly help you identify whether what you put together was based on a performance need or not, or whether it's a content dump. Because you know what, it's really hard to measure a content dump, because you're just telling people everything. And if you don't know what you want people to do with the information, then it's hard to measure, because you're not set up anything to measure, right? I don't know what they're supposed to do. So what am I measuring?
Right. So I don't know if this is opening a Pandora's box here, but a good portion of the people listening right now are from the higher education space.
Yeah.
Or K-12 or whatever. Most of the examples you've given have been from a corporate/private sector learning and development training space. Do I worry about this? Do I care about it?
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Y'all, K-12 and higher ed are like some of the biggest, most important areas where we should be using xAPI right now, if they're doing asynchronous stuff, which a lot of schools are. And so if you're doing anything, like, if you're a college and you're set up with an asynchronous program, and you've got people that are going through content and you're doing a bunch of stuff and it's just a bunch of content, and then there's a picture and there's a whatever, like, wouldn't it be helpful for me to know, like, how much time are people spending on pages before they click forward? Now, some of these things LMSs track, right? So you're trying to piece together what are the pieces that I can get and what are the pieces that I can't. There's a really cool tool that is it's an annotation tool that will send statements when you highlight things. So there are all sorts of really cool things that people have put together that you can actually track some of this stuff. As a matter of fact, highlighting things and making notes would be a great thing to know in higher ed. Like, what are the things that people felt was most important? What types of notes did they make? And those types of things might be useful. So, and especially right now after the pandemic and trying to get people back upskilled again and seeing where gaps are. Just the increase in asynchronous content, I would imagine it would be super important to know.
All right, cool. Well, the last question I have for you is, what does the next 6 to 18 months look like for xAPI and this technology and the surrounding platforms that you need, like the record stores and the LXPs and those kinds of things? Because it sounded to me like, I know that there's been some improvements and some upgrades over the last 10 years and whatnot, but like, are you expecting like continued evolution, making it easier, or what's it look like?
Yeah, if I had to put money on it, I would expect that within the next couple of years, we're going to see all these tools just have custom statement builders inside of them. I would expect to see any learning if it were me, and it is me often, because I have to do this with my clients, whenever I'm helping a client look for a new learning platform, if they don't have the ability to either send statement, like to connect to an LRS, or have an internal LRS functionality. If I can't publish stuff to it for xAPI, I tell them not to get it, right? It's like that is a tool that you don't need to mess with, because you need to be able to support xAPI today. So I would say that you're going to start to see learning platforms that can either plug into an LRS. I actually prefer to have the functionality, like being able to plug into an LRS, than having them have an inbuilt LRS. I just find working with the data a little bit easier. I think that you're going to see tools that just allow you to pick your statements so that you can say, when this happens, I want you to tell me that, send this, this, and this. I want you to tell me that so-and-so did this in this platform or in this scenario or whatever. I also think that you're going to see people better understand what it is they're looking for. Right. So I think that you're going to have people that are trying to better understand what's going on, because a lot of money is being invested in this, and especially since the pandemic, like all of a sudden everybody knew what e-learning was. All of a sudden everybody knew what virtual training was, because everybody had to do it, So I think we're going to start to see a lot more of that. And the other thing, I'll give credit to your colleague, Chris, who asked me right before this started about ChatGPT, which is something that I have to be careful about how often I get on it, because it takes me down a gigantic rabbit hole. But Chris had asked me, can it generate xAPI code? So I actually went out to ChatGPT right as we were getting started and asked it if it could write xAPI statements, and it said yes, it can help you write xAPI statements, and to provide it with more information. So thanks to Chris, I have a rabbit hole for this afternoon where I'm going to see if it can troubleshoot my xAPI code, because I actually have a project right now that I need to see why it's not sending the statement that I want it to. So I would assume, based on what I've done with ChatGPT for everything else lately, it probably could give you quite a bit of help with this. So if that's something that you're into, it's a lot of fun to play with, and
absolutely
good stuff to know about.
Sarah, I cannot believe that we're 40 minutes into this. Like, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to talk about this. It's exciting. Your energy is infectious, and your passion for this particular technology is amazing. You are the head ninja. I'm going to say head ninja, learning ninjas over there. How would you like for people to get in touch with you when they do have questions?
Yeah, of course. So learningninjas.com is an easy way to get us. If you go to learningninjas.com, we have all sorts of blog posts and fun stuff and resources out there, but you can connect with us through the contact us page. If you just want to email me, you can email me at sarah@learningninjas.com. That'll come to me that way. And then, can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm sharing all sorts of stuff out there too. So all the standard ways, not on Twitter or anything like that anymore. Just the other standard ways, I guess, now.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I wish you all the best, and I'm sure that we're going to be seeing and hearing from you again sometime in the near future. If not at one of the conferences, another one of these conversations. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I think it would be, I would do a disservice if I didn't say check out learnxapi.com, since this is a Learn xAPI or an xAPI session. So that's another great place to connect with us too.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you again for listening to the eLearn podcast here from OpenLMS. I just wanted to ask one more time, if you enjoyed this show, if you learned something, if you were inspired, if you were challenged, if you feel like, this is something you can take into your practice, please do me a favor. And right now on your podcast player, hit subscribe. That way you're never going to miss a future episode. Also, come over to elearnmagazine.com and subscribe there as well, because we have tons of great information about how to create killer online learning outcomes. Thanks.